The cruelest thing Ethan Walker had ever seen wasn't a chain. It was a sign that convinced everyone to stop seeing a person. The market station Viral 9 drifted through the dark like a city built from scrap metal and old promises. Cargo haulers lined the docking bays. Freight alarms echoed through steel corridors. The smell of machine oil mixed with recycled air as thousands of travelers pushed through the endless rows of vendors beneath flickering neon lights. Ethan adjusted the worn strap of his tool bag and checked the balance on his wrist display for the third time in 10 minutes. It wasn't much, just enough to buy a replacement oxygen filter for his transport ship if the merchant didn't raise the price again. His vessel had carried him across half the sector, and lately it seemed determined to fall apart one component at a time. He moved through the crowd with the tired focus of a man who had spent too many years solving problems nobody else wanted. A mechanic shouted over discounted reactor parts. A trader advertised imported crystals from a distant moon. Somewhere nearby, a child laughed. Then Ethan noticed something strange. Not because it was loud, because it was quiet. Near the edge of the marketplace, where fewer customers wandered and fewer lights worked, a small crowd stood in a loose circle. Nobody spoke. Nobody stepped closer. They simply looked and kept walking. Ethan followed their gaze. A young alien woman sat on a metal platform bolted to the floor. Thin chains secured her wrists to a support column behind her. Her silver-white hair fell across one side of her face. Her skin carried the pale blue tone of moonlit water. Dirt marked the edges of her sleeves. A few raindrops from a leaking overhead pipe tapped softly against the platform beside her. Hanging from her neck was a weathered sign. One word: unwanted. Ethan stopped walking. The crowd continued moving around him like a river around a stone. The alien girl didn't raise her head. She didn't beg. She didn't reach for anyone. She simply sat there with her back straight and her eyes fixed on the floor. The stillness bothered him more than any plea would have. A vendor nearby noticed him staring. "Don't waste your time," the man said with a shrug. "Nobody wants her." Ethan looked at the sign again, then at the girl, then back at the sign. The vendor laughed. "Been there 3 days. 3 days. Ethan glanced at the leaking pipe, at the cold metal beneath her, at the people pretending not to notice. The girl finally lifted her eyes. For a brief second, her violet gaze met his. There was no hope in it. No expectation. Just exhaustion. The kind that came from disappointment happening too many times. Ethan felt something tighten in his chest. He looked away first. Around him, the station buzzed with business, negotiations, profits, and schedules. Yet somehow that forgotten corner felt louder than the entire market. Because for the first time that day, Ethan realized he could no longer remember why he had come there in the first place. The vendor was already looking away when Ethan stepped closer. That told him everything. People had stopped seeing the girl long before he arrived. She had become part of the scenery, like a broken light fixture or a dent in the wall. Easy to notice. Easier to ignore. Ethan adjusted his jacket and approached the platform. The alien girl immediately lowered her eyes again. Not out of fear. Out of habit. As if experience had taught her that looking at people only invited disappointment. The chain attached to her wrist gave a faint metallic rattle as she shifted slightly. A data tag hung beside the platform. Ethan glanced at the display. Species classification. Age estimate. Processing code. Sale history. The final line caught his attention. 7 transfer attempts. 7 returns. His jaw tightened. The vendor noticed where he was looking and gave a dismissive wave. "See? I told you. Nobody keeps her." Ethan frowned. "Why?" The merchant shrugged. "Depends who you ask." "I am asking you." The man leaned back against a crate. Too quiet. Too proud. Does not follow instructions quickly enough. Does not smile enough. Costs more to transport than most buyers want to spend. Pick a reason. Ethan looked at the girl again. None of those sounded like reasons. They sounded like excuses. The station lights flickered overhead. Somewhere deeper in the market, a cargo horn sounded twice. The girl remained motionless. Ethan noticed something then. Her hands. They rested neatly in her lap despite the restraints. Not trembling. Not clenched. Controlled. Deliberate. Like someone refusing to surrender the last piece of dignity they still possessed. "What is your name?" Ethan asked. For several seconds, she did not answer. The merchant laughed. "Good luck with that." Then a quiet voice finally emerged. "Soralia." The name was soft enough that Ethan almost missed it. He nodded. "I am Ethan." Her expression did not change. She simply looked away again. Ethan had expected anger, suspicion, maybe bitterness. Instead, he found exhaustion, the kind that settled deep inside a person after too many doors had closed. His wrist display vibrated. The reminder about the oxygen filter flashed across the screen. Purchase deadline. Remaining credits. Remaining time. Reality returned immediately. Without the replacement filter, his ship would not safely complete another long-range jump. He knew that. Every practical part of his brain reminded him that he had enough problems already. Yet his eyes drifted back to the sign around her neck. Unwanted. One word. One judgment. One label that apparently carried more weight than an entire life. Ethan slowly reached into his pocket. The credits stored there represented weeks of repair work and sleepless nights. The merchant noticed the movement instantly. His eyes brightened. Interested, Ethan ignored him. Instead, he looked directly at Sorelia. For the first time, she met his gaze without looking away. There was no hope there. No expectation. But there was curiosity. Just a small spark. Barely visible. As though she could not understand why someone was still standing in front of her after all this time. Ethan looked at the sign one last time. Then he made a decision that felt completely unreasonable. The kind of decision that changed lives before anyone realized it had happened. The merchant smiled the moment he saw the credits appear on Ethan's display. It was the kind of smile that belonged to someone closing a transaction, not changing a life. I knew you would come around, he said. Ethan ignored him. His attention remained on Sorelia. The faint spark of curiosity in her violet eyes vanished almost immediately. In its place came something harder. Disappointment. She looked away before the transfer was even complete. Ethan frowned. That was not the reaction he expected. The merchant tapped a confirmation pad. Ownership transfer initiated. The words had barely left the speaker when the chain rattled sharply. Sorelia rose to her feet so quickly that several nearby shoppers turned their heads. Her voice was calm, but there was steel beneath it. Do not. Ethan blinked. Do not what? Do not buy me. The merchant rolled his eyes. Ignore her. Sorelia continued as though he had not spoken. You do not know what you are purchasing. Ethan glanced between them. I am not purchasing a person. The merchant laughed. That is exactly what you are doing. The sound seemed to make Sorelia flinch more than the chains. Ethan noticed it immediately. She turned toward him fully for the first time. She was taller than he had realized while seated, nearly matching his height. Despite the exhaustion on her face, there was an unmistakable sense of dignity in the way she carried herself. Leave, she said quietly. Buy your ship part. Forget you saw me. Ethan studied her expression. Why? For a moment, she looked genuinely surprised by the question, as if nobody had asked her what she wanted in a very long time. Then she glanced toward the sign hanging from her neck. Because they are correct. Ethan followed her gaze. About what? Her eyes lowered. About me. Something about the answer bothered him. Not because he believed it. Because she sounded as though she did. The transfer terminal emitted a soft tone. Payment approved. The merchant immediately began unlocking administrative restraints on his console. Congratulations, he announced. Temporary custody rights transferred for 72 station hours. Ethan barely heard him. Sorelia's attention had fixed on the floor again. Whatever fragile curiosity had appeared earlier was gone. In its place stood a wall built from experience. Too many promises. Too many disappointments. Too many people deciding her worth before learning her name. Ethan slowly removed his weatherproof jacket. The station's recycled air carried a noticeable chill this close to the outer hull sectors. Without saying a word, he stepped forward and carefully placed the jacket over her shoulders. Sorelia froze. The merchant stopped talking. Even several passers-by slowed their pace. It was such a small gesture. Yet somehow it felt completely out of place in that corner of the market. The jacket was warm from Ethan's body heat. Sorelia stared down at it, as though she had forgotten what kindness looked like. Ethan cleared his throat. You looked cold. She blinked once, then twice. For the first time since he had arrived, she seemed unable to find an answer. The merchant finally recovered enough to scoff. Human, you are making a mistake. Ethan looked at the chain still attached to her wrist, then at the sign hanging from her neck, then back at the merchant. Maybe, he said, but I think everyone else already made a bigger one. The administrative lock on the restraint released with a sharp electronic click. It was a small sound, barely noticeable beneath the noise of the market. Yet Ethan watched Sorelia react as though an entire wall had shifted. She did not move. She did not step away. She simply stared at the loose chain hanging from her wrist. For several long seconds, nobody spoke. Then the merchant cleared his throat. Transfer complete. Station regulations now apply. Ethan looked up. What regulations? The merchant tapped the display panel and turned it toward him. A block of legal text filled the screen. Temporary custody assignment. 72 station hours. Responsibility for housing, transportation, and conduct. Ethan rubbed a hand across his jaw. You are telling me I cannot simply release her? Not on station property. The merchant seemed amused by his frustration. Once custody is accepted, you are responsible for her until departure or expiration of contract. Ethan glanced toward Cerelia. She had already lowered her eyes again, almost as if she expected this outcome. Another cage, just a different shape. The realization bothered him more than he expected. Around them, the crowd slowly lost interest and continued moving through the market. The moment was already being forgotten by everyone except the two people trapped inside it. Ethan exhaled slowly. Fine. The merchant grinned. Fine. I have a ship. That is unfortunate for your budget. Ethan ignored him. He turned toward Cerelia instead. Can you walk? Her expression hardened instantly. Yes. The answer came with enough dignity to make him regret asking. Right. Sorry. She looked confused. For what? For asking it like that. For a brief moment, something flickered across her face. Surprise, perhaps. Most people apologized when they wanted something. Ethan seemed to apologize because he meant it. The difference was small, but she noticed it. They began moving through the station together. Ethan walked slightly ahead, carrying his tool bag over one shoulder. Cerelia followed several feet behind. Not because he asked her to, because she seemed uncertain what else to do. The jacket remained draped across her shoulders. More than once, Ethan noticed passing travelers staring at the sign still hanging around her neck. Unwanted. Every glance seemed to push her farther inward. Near an intersection, Ethan suddenly stopped. Cerelia nearly walked into him. He pointed toward a waste recycler built into the wall. Give me the sign. Her eyes widened. What? The sign. She instinctively touched the edge of it. The motion looked protective rather than defensive. Ethan understood then. She had worn it long enough that it no longer felt separate from her. It had become part of how she saw herself. You do not need that anymore, he said quietly. Cerelia stared at him, then at the recycler, then back at the sign. For a moment, she looked as though she wanted to argue. Instead, she slowly removed the cord from around her neck. Her hands trembled only once. Ethan accepted the weathered piece of metal. He looked at the single word stamped across its surface. Then he dropped it into the recycler slot. The machine swallowed it immediately. Neither of them spoke as they continued toward the docking sector. But for the first time since leaving the market, Cerelia reached up and pulled his jacket a little tighter around herself. Docking Bay 47 sat near the outer ring of Viral 9 where the station's constant vibration could be felt through the floor. Cargo cranes moved overhead with rhythmic mechanical groans. Warning lights flashed amber along maintenance tracks. Ethan led the way through rows of aging transport vessels until they reached a medium-sized freighter with faded gray paint and a name barely visible beneath years of repairs. Iron Horizon. Cerelia stopped several feet away and stared at the ship. The vessel looked functional, but only in the way a determined person looked functional after too many difficult years. Weld marks covered portions of the hull. Replacement panels came from at least 3 different manufacturers. One engine housing carried a patch that was clearly older than the rest of the ship. Ethan noticed her expression. She is not pretty, he admitted. But she flies. Cerelia studied the freighter for another moment. You speak about it as if it is alive. Ethan shrugged. Sometimes I think it is. The loading ramp lowered with a hydraulic hiss. Warm air drifted outward carrying the familiar scent of metal, circuitry, and recycled oxygen. Ethan stepped inside first. Cerelia hesitated near the entrance. Her eyes moved carefully across every corner of the cargo bay. Ethan recognized the behavior immediately. She was searching for danger, looking for hidden conditions, waiting for the moment when kindness revealed its price. The cargo bay itself was simple. Storage containers lined one wall. Tool cabinets occupied another. Work lights cast a warm glow across scratched deck plating. Nothing luxurious. Nothing intimidating. Just a working ship owned by a working man. Ethan set his tool bag on a nearby bench. You can come in. Soralia remained near the ramp. Why? Ethan blinked. Because standing in the hallway seems uncomfortable. No. Her voice remained quiet. Why am I here? The question lingered between them. Ethan looked away for a second. Not because he lacked an answer. Because the truth sounded strange even to him. I do not know, he admitted. You do not know? I know why I stopped. He leaned against a storage crate. I know why I could not walk away. The rest of it. He exhaled slowly. I am figuring that out. Soralia stared at him as though the answer made no sense. Perhaps it did not. Most people justified their actions with certainty. Ethan seemed willing to admit uncertainty. Somehow that felt more honest. A soft chime interrupted the silence. The ship computer announced a maintenance alert regarding the oxygen filtration system. Ethan closed his eyes briefly. Right. That problem still exists. He moved toward an access panel near the engine corridor. Before disappearing around the corner, he stopped and pointed toward a door on the upper deck. Second room on the left. Soralia followed his gesture cautiously. What is it? A cabin. She frowned. For me. If you want it. And if I do not. Ethan considered the question seriously. Then there is a couch in the common room. For the first time, something close to confusion crossed her face. There were no instructions. No demands. No conditions attached to either option. Just a choice. Ethan disappeared into the maintenance corridor moments later. The sound of tools and access panels echoed faintly through the ship. Soralia stood alone in the cargo bay for nearly a minute before slowly making her way toward the cabin. When she opened the door, she found a small room with a bed, a desk, a reading light, and a viewport overlooking the stars. Nothing more. Nothing less. Yet as she stepped inside, she noticed something unusual. The door lock panel was mounted on the inside. Anyone could leave whenever they wished. Soralia remained inside the cabin long after the door closed behind her. The room was small by most standards, barely large enough for the bed, desk, and storage compartment built into the wall, yet it felt larger than any place she had occupied in months. Perhaps because nobody was watching her. Perhaps because nobody had told her where to stand. The stars beyond the viewport drifted silently across the darkness. She sat carefully on the edge of the bed and waited. Minutes passed. Then more. Her eyes repeatedly moved toward the door lock. Mounted on the inside. The detail refused to leave her thoughts. Eventually she stood and approached it. One touch brought up the control panel. Another touch unlocked the door completely. She opened it. No alarm sounded. No one appeared. The corridor beyond remained empty. She closed the door again and stared at it in silence. Somewhere deeper inside the ship, metal tools clicked against machinery. Ethan was still working. The steady rhythm continued for nearly an hour. Curiosity eventually overcame caution. Soralia followed the sound through the corridor until she reached the engineering compartment. Ethan sat cross-legged beside an open maintenance panel, his sleeves rolled up and his hands stained with grease. A portable work light cast warm gold across the cramped space. He looked up when he noticed her standing there. Everything okay? The question caught her off guard. Nobody had asked if she was okay in a very long time. Yes, she answered after a moment. Ethan nodded and returned to the damaged filtration unit. The silence stretched comfortably between them. Soralia found herself watching him work. There was something unusual about the way he moved. No wasted motions. No dramatic gestures. Just patience. One problem at a time. One bolt. One wire. One repair. Finally she spoke. The oxygen system is failing. Ethan laughed softly. You noticed that? The warning alarm repeated every 12 minutes. Then yes, it is definitely failing. She glanced at the collection of replacement parts spread across the floor. Can you repair it? Ethan tightened a connector. Eventually. Eventually is not a technical measurement. A faint smile appeared on his face. You sound like an engineer. The words escaped before she could stop them. I was trained as one. Ethan paused. For the first time, genuine surprise crossed his features. You were. Soralia immediately regretted speaking. Information had always carried a cost. Yet Ethan simply waited. No pressure. No interrogation. Just patience again. Long ago, she said quietly. Ethan nodded as though that answer was enough. Perhaps it was. A few minutes later he stood and stretched. Have you eaten? She hesitated. Not today. Ethan blinked. Not today. She looked away. The answer spoke for itself. Without another word, he crossed the room and opened a storage cabinet. A few minutes later, they sat across from one another at the small table in the common room. The meal was simple: heated vegetable stew, bread, and water. Nothing impressive. Yet Cerelia noticed something immediately. Ethan had given her the larger portion. When she looked up, he was pretending not to notice. For the first time since entering the ship, something unfamiliar stirred beneath the exhaustion. Not trust, not yet, but the possibility of it. The station's artificial night cycle began a few hours later. Through the viewport, thousands of distant lights glowed against the darkness like scattered stars trapped inside metal walls. The iron horizon remained quiet except for the occasional hum of life support systems and the distant click of cooling machinery. Ethan sat alone at the common room table, studying repair estimates on his tablet. The numbers were not encouraging. Replacement filters, fuel reserves, docking fees. Every calculation ended the same way. He was running out of credits. A soft sound pulled his attention away from the screen. Cerelia stood near the entrance to the room, holding an empty cup. For a second, she looked as though she might leave. Then she walked over and placed the cup beside the sink. Ethan noticed something different immediately. She no longer carried herself like someone waiting for permission to exist. The change was small, barely noticeable, yet it was there. Could not sleep, he asked. Cerelia glanced toward the viewport. I am not accustomed to quiet places. Ethan smiled faintly. This ship is usually louder. She looked at him curiously. Then why is it quiet? Because half the equipment is broken. To his surprise, a faint laugh escaped her. It lasted only a second, but it was real. Ethan found himself smiling back. The moment passed quickly, yet somehow the room felt warmer afterward. Cerelia approached the viewport and stared out at the station lights. When I was younger, I believed every light represented someone important. Ethan leaned back in his chair. And now, her reflection appeared faintly in the glass. Now I know most people are simply trying to survive another day. The answer lingered between them. Ethan understood it better than he wanted to admit. A notification suddenly appeared on his tablet. Station registry update. He frowned and opened the message. The screen filled with legal information connected to the temporary custody contract. Most of it was routine. Then a small symbol caught his attention. An unfamiliar crest hidden inside the identification data attached to Cerelia's file. Ethan zoomed in. The emblem resembled a crown formed from 7 interlocking stars. Beneath it sat a classification marker he had never seen before. Restricted Heritage Registry. His expression tightened. Cerelia noticed immediately. What is wrong? Ethan turned the screen toward her. The moment her eyes landed on the symbol, all color seemed to drain from her face. She stepped backward. Where did you get that? It came with your station file. Cerelia stared at the crest in silence. Not surprise. Recognition. Ethan slowly lowered the tablet. You know what it means. She closed her eyes briefly. The room became very still. Even the ship seemed quieter than before. Finally she spoke. I hoped it was gone. Ethan watched her carefully. What is it? Cerelia opened her eyes again. The exhaustion was still there. The sadness too. But now another emotion had joined them. Fear. Genuine fear. She looked toward the dark window beyond the stars and whispered words so softly he almost missed them. It is the reason nobody was supposed to find me. The silence that followed seemed heavier than anything Ethan had heard since arriving on Viral 9. The station lights beyond the viewport drifted slowly through the darkness, while Cerelia stood motionless beside the window. She looked less like a passenger and more like someone staring at a ghost only she could see. Ethan lowered the tablet onto the table. Start from the beginning, he said quietly. Cerelia gave a small shake of her head. The beginning disappeared a long time ago. Ethan waited. He had already learned that forcing answers from her accomplished nothing. After nearly a minute, she finally moved toward the table and sat down across from him. Her fingers rested lightly against the edge of the metal surface. The symbol belongs to House Venn. Ethan recognized the name immediately, not because he knew the details, because he had heard stories. Everyone who spent enough time moving between star systems had heard them. House Venn, one of the oldest ruling families in a region of space so distant that most humans never visited it. A dynasty that had supposedly collapsed years ago. I thought they were gone, Ethan said. Cerelia smiled sadly. So did many people. The common room lights reflected faintly in her violet eyes. When powerful families fall, History becomes whatever the winners decide to write. Ethan leaned forward slightly. You were part of that family. It was not a question. Sorelia looked down at her hands. I was born into it. The admission seemed to cost her something. Ethan remained silent. Eventually, she continued. When the government changed, House Vin became an inconvenience. Some members disappeared. Others fled. Many simply stopped speaking their own names. Ethan remembered the 7 transfer attempts listed in her station record. The return sales. The sign. The market. Suddenly those details looked very different. You were hiding. Sorelia laughed once, though there was no humor in it. I was trying to survive. The ship's ventilation system hummed softly above them. Somewhere inside the engineering compartment, cooling metal clicked as temperatures adjusted. Ordinary sounds. Yet the room felt anything but ordinary now. Ethan glanced at the crest displayed on the tablet. If this registry marker exists, someone else can find it too. Sorelia closed her eyes briefly. Yes. Is that why you were afraid? She opened them again. No. Ethan frowned. No. Sorelia looked directly at him. I was afraid because someone already did. The words settled heavily between them. Before Ethan could respond, the ship computer emitted a soft notification tone. Incoming station communication. Priority level elevated. Ethan immediately turned toward the nearest display panel. A message appeared across the screen. Station security inquiry. Verification requested regarding registered custody subject, Sorelia Vin. Ethan felt his stomach tighten. The communication had arrived less than 2 hours after he discovered the crest. Someone had been searching. Sorelia saw the message at the same moment he did. Her face went pale. They found it. Ethan studied the screen for several seconds. Then he calmly reached forward and closed the message window without responding. Sorelia stared at him in disbelief. What are you doing? Ethan stood and looked toward the docking bay visible through the viewport. Cargo ships moved slowly between illuminated platforms. Beyond them stretched open space, endless and silent. The same thing I've been doing since I met you. Sorelia blinked. What is that? Ethan picked up the repair tablet and headed toward engineering. Trying to fix a problem everybody else decided was easier to throw away. The next morning began with the low hum of engines and the pale glow of station light filtering through the Iron Horizons viewport. Ethan had spent most of the night repairing systems and ignoring incoming inquiries. By sunrise cycle, there were 7 unanswered messages waiting in the communication queue. He deleted none of them. He simply refused to open them. Across the common room, Sorelia sat quietly with a cup of tea warming her hands. The fear from the previous evening had not vanished, but it had changed. It no longer looked like panic. It looked like someone preparing to stop running. A soft chime echoed through the ship. Another message. Then another. Ethan glanced at the display. The station authorities were requesting confirmation of identity. Legal representatives were requesting contact. Historical archives were requesting verification. One forgotten name had suddenly become important again. Sorelia stared at the growing list of notifications. I spent years trying to disappear, she said softly. Ethan looked up from the maintenance panel. Looks like you were not very successful. To his surprise, she smiled. It was small, tired, real. A few hours later, a final message arrived. Unlike the others, it carried authentication seals from multiple systems. Ethan opened it. The room fell silent as the contents appeared. House Vin had never officially ended. Surviving records confirmed that a single legal heir remained. Sorelia Vin. Recognition rights would be restored immediately upon identity confirmation. Ethan read the message twice before setting the tablet down. Sorelia did not reach for it. She simply stared out the window at the stars. You are not surprised, he said. I stopped being surprised a long time ago. The words carried years of exhaustion. Ethan understood. People had spent years arguing about her value while never once asking what she wanted. Finally, he asked, what happens now? Sorelia remained silent for several seconds. Then she looked around the ship. The scratched table, the aging bulkheads, the repaired wiring hidden behind access panels. The jacket still folded carefully beside her cabin door. Ordinary things. Human things. Things nobody important would notice. For the first time, she said quietly, I get to decide. Later that day, the station registry formally restored her legal status. The transaction took less than 3 minutes. Years of fear erased by a few lines of updated data. When the confirmation arrived, neither of them celebrated. They simply sat together in comfortable silence. Outside, cargo vessels continued their endless journeys. Inside, the ship remained warm. Eventually, Soralia stood and walked toward the viewport. Reflected in the glass, the stars shimmered around her like distant memories. Ethan joined her a few feet away. Neither spoke. There was nothing left to prove, nothing left to explain. After a while, Soralia finally broke the silence. Do you know the strange part? Ethan shook his head. What? Her eyes remained fixed on the stars. The market was wrong. Ethan smiled faintly. I noticed. She turned toward him. The exhaustion was still there. The sadness too. But now something brighter stood beside them. Dignity. Hope. A future. I was never unwanted, she said. Ethan looked back at the endless lights beyond the glass. No, he replied. You were just waiting for someone to see you. And in the reflection of the viewport, surrounded by a universe that had nearly forgotten her, Soralia smiled as though she finally believed it.